Slips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And I'm expecting Meki to be unmuted and start to read the intro for the second hour. But in his absence, I will say, you're back with David Meki's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button and subscribe to the archives. Not or, it's an and. I'm just going to change my text. It's been a long time. There we go. Now, get yourself some free merchandise from the station's website. No, not free. Get yourself some great merchandise. I've just put my teeth back in. Get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. A t-shirt, a mug, anything you like. And we're going to thank you collectively for listening to Revolution Radio. Now, we're halfway through show number 654. The first
460
hour.
and 500.
That's so correct. It's not funny. Now, the first hour is news. So if you've only picked this show up, there's a whole station. It's called revolution.radio, where you can go to the website, you can chat to us while we're online. There's a chat room. It's really cool. And if you want to hear the first half of this, it will be show number 653. So we've already been speaking for an hour on this, okay? So do jump in and say hello in the chat room and subscribe to the station. It all helps. Every little bit helps, and I know it's tough, but if you can't do anything, then just tell someone else about the station. That's what we ask. It's quite easy. You can do it. It takes just a couple of breaths, and then you can move on. Anyway, if you're new, say hello, make a comment, like and subscribe, and share it online on YouTube, and take the time to come and join us online in the chat room. Meki.
That's right. That's where we are in the chat. Now, last week we shared with you a couple of new articles, insights, I guess, into 9/11. Susan Lindau's book I recommend, I really do. We also looked at the Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth. It's still going. Okay, and we also looked at a Popular Mechanics article, which was updated September 10, 2024, and we looked at the comments rather than the article, because the comments actually are self-explanatory and they give you the whole article, so that's really good. Essentially, it was just a rehash of what the Popular Mechanics had said about the 9/11 text before. There are only two more comments left, which we will bring to you. Excuse me. Dave, why don't you give us Dwebonic23 and I'll do Sidonia.com, and then we're done with that article. But these are comments on the article, everybody.
Yeah, that's right. That's important to note. The amount of precisely set explosions of the size necessary for a planned uniform collapse would have shown up on seismographs and sound recordings and would have been heard. They weren't. Alex Jones's seismograph theories were debunked by the people who produced them. He chose to only show one version. And in brackets, I'm shocked, says the person. Dwebonic23. Whereas the larger version showed he was talking rubbish. It's always possible that it was an inside job, of course, but none of the evidence frequently used to suggest this shows anything of the sort. As annoyed as you get when you see what you think is a massive cover-up is as annoyed as I get when I am constantly asked to believe that the universe is a benign place where bad things only ever happen when the government, deep state, illuminated masters, or Jewish people are the cause. says Dwee Bonnick 23, back in 24th of March 2024. Random bad stuff happens perpetually and continually without any government's help. By now, many of the thousands of people necessary to keep quiet forever about such a cover-up would be coming forward in droves. They're not.
Okay, let me just quickly say something again, then we're going to go to Sardonia.com. Yeah, of course, bad stuff happens. There's no argument here. However, when it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, and it smells like a duck, and it tastes like a duck,
Ooh.
It's probably a duck. And the thing is this: anybody can just throw out wild ideas and theories about anything. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's freedom of speech right there. You're allowed to.
Yeah. But when the evidence mounts up and it's not addressed, and when things just don't make sense in the physical world that we inhabit, and when you find the money trail, and when you find people benefiting from certain situations, you have to ask yourself, well, is there more to the story? And this is where I sort of, hook into the whole thing. And I've spoken to people that had first-hand knowledge of certain things that happened. Completely by coincidence, it just blew me away that they were actually in certain locations and overheard certain things. But nonetheless, there you are. I can dismiss it and say, it's full of, cow manure. but maybe you're not. Maybe not. And as to thousands and thousands of people thousands of, even hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of people don't have to keep quiet. To this day, we do not know what's happening at Groom Lake. We don't know. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of people that work there.
Mm-hmm.
The people that died at the Groom Lake facility were not allowed to be told why they were dying. They were exposed to something, but it was ruled in the national interest not to disclose to them. That's what they died, but would it have helped in their treatment? Maybe, I don't know. But they were never told. When I say Groom Lake, it's Area 51. That's what I'm talking about. We know it exists. We know it's there, the Groom Lake facility. We know thousands of people work there, and we still don't know what's happening there. The Vatican archives, they're real. We know they're real. And yet, all we hear are rumors of things that are there, like the chronovisor or other things, the lost prophecies of the children. Oh, where was the place? I'll come to me in a second. But the point is, Fatima, I think it was Fatima. But this is, it's a real thing. People will shut up for decades, if not hundreds of years. There seemed to be almost a systematic process of child abuse in the Catholic Church. I'm picking on the Catholic Church because that's where most of the stuff happened. Other churches and organizations are similar. But nothing was talked about for decades. Certainly, nothing was talked about for hundreds of years. My grandfather wasn't a big fan of the church. He told me, near our village, there was a place called Siegburg. Siegburg was a middling-sized town, and on top of the Siegburg mountain was like a nunnery, you call it, right? A nunnery, a cloister. It was, in German, it's called a cloister, and nobody was allowed to build anywhere near it. And my grandfather said, "Do you know why that is?" I said, "No, I didn't even know you weren't allowed to build there in the first place." Now, my grandfather was a very smart and very educated kind of guy. I mean, he spoke fluent ancient Greek, French, Latin, German, Polish, and had some Russian as well. So anyway, they educated people differently in his time. Because what happened in the olden days, of course you had to abstain if you're a nun or a monk or a priest or whatever, but no one ever really did. So they whenever they dug, in fact, he said they did dig there. I think he said in the 60s or 50s. I can't remember what he said, but anyway, 50s and 60s, and they found hundreds, if not thousands, of skeletons of little babies. So what happened is that the nuns would fall pregnant, can't have the child, of course. So if you can't give to someone else, just bury it. And it's so much so that the entire area around that place must be littered with infant skeletons, and potentially other places in the world. I mean, there was a secret graveyard in Canada, in certain places of these native children that had been buried in these graves, completely unbeknownst to anyone. You heard about it recently when there was this big hoo-ha in Canada about the Catholic Church and its treatment of native people in Canada. So no, it doesn't take thousands of people not to say anything. Most people just don't say anything. You don't have to threaten them specifically. You don't have to do anything at all, in most instances, right? Now tell me, why haven't we got any more information out of Groom Lake? Really? Because a lot of people take that secrecy really seriously, right? And if there are consequences, they're usually deadly consequences. If you try to make it into that facility, they will shoot you. They've got shoot to kill warning signs on the fences there. That's a fact. Okay? You can set
They're
on
not
your
going
head.
to give you a tour and say thank you very much, right? And stamp your loyalty card. They're not doing anything of the sort.
I find the naivety of people astounding when they start talking about this. Now, the first argument I hear is this. Oh, the government would never do that. We'll talk about it in a second. Oh, it's impossible for a secret like that not to come out. Well,
no, rubbish. NSA was alive for 25 years. No one knew about it.
There you go. Now, let's be clear here, though. It's not a secret anymore. We know that things happen and they're wrong, and we're asking questions. The problem is that people are being stonewalled. The survivors of 9/11 and their families, right, and families of victims, as well as other people looking for the truth about that particular event and other events too, they're being stonewalled. The 9/11 Commission did nothing to address this. Nothing. They looked at nothing of any value for anyone wanting to have any questions answered, full stop. And that's a fact. And to have the naivety, because it's naivety, or willful ignorance, either or, right?
Or instructed obfuscation.
Yeah, or to say then that, oh no, that can't be anything secret because it would have come out by now. No, it wouldn't have. And even if it does trickle out, we shall never accept any crazy conspiracy theories.
That's right.
Within hours, he said this. I remember this. Within hours. When, hey, hang on, buddy, we don't even, what? But no one is talking about anything like that at the moment, right? But of course he knew they would, because nothing on that day would add up.
That's right.
Nothing. Sorry, that's all I have to say about that. It really upsets me when I see these arguments, all right? And people that clearly have no idea how the world really works, right? And they think they do, and when you tell them, no, you're wrong, they get really upset.
Oh, don't they?
And I mean, do you think Germans really didn't know that the Jews were being carted off to concentration camps, especially in villages right next to the concentration camps where they were killed? Do you really think they didn't know? They were terrified. But they couldn't know. They couldn't allow themselves to know because it was terrifying. Because if they had said something, they would have been killed. If you say something in this, even today, if you say something that is so fundamentally threatening to the power apparatus, the power machine as it exists, it will completely destroy you. It will turn you into minced meat. There will be nothing left of you. There won't even be a memory of you left when they're done with you. If you truly have something that could destroy the power apparatus as it is. So anybody who's still alive is either bought off or is not in fact threatening the power apparatus because they haven't got enough reach or, whatever. But, Dave and I are still here, so it's all good. Tangible. But,
You've done it now.
So this is what Cydonia had to say in response to Dwi Bonik 23 on May 15, 2024. That the collapse was completely uniform in both cases, even though the damage was asymmetrical, still remains to be explained. Though, even more remarkable is the lack of debris. a fact that clearly rules out the controlled demolition scenario, as well as any other conventional explanation. As the pike of T degrees was 1800 degrees, which is the while steel melts at twice the temperature. This is Fahrenheit, by the way. Then the claim regarding the seismic readings is just a denial that the graph shows spikes at the time of the collapse, but the waves are so constrained that it is hard to see for the untrained eye how to read them. The strange fact that most high hierarchy people were not present on that day, right? Also the fact that both towers were insured very recently. The fact that the CIA knew of an attempt to use hijacked planes in attacks. Right? So these are points that Sardonia lists here. And then the final comment here of Sardonia is, those are not evidence, those points that Sardonia raised, but they raise many questions that are hard to answer. Okay, so that's I agree. We haven't answered the questions, and no one is even looking at answering the questions, Dave, that I can see.
Yeah, that's right.
Which brings us to the 5 unanswered questions about 9/11. Why don't you share that with us, my friend?
Yeah, I will. See, what the 9/11 Commission report failed to tell us, this is the author's James Ridgway. The 9/11 Commission report is widely declared to be the definitive account of the most devastating attack ever to take place on American soil. But in truth, the most vital questions about 9/11 have not been asked. In an ever-growing number of facts cast clouds of suspicion over the actions and motivations of many key government officials and agencies. In the 5 unanswered questions about 9/11, investigative reporter James Ridgway pinpoints 5 glaring black holes of information surrounding 9/11. Number 1, the initial government response. Why was Cheney running the country on 9/11? Where was Donald Rumsfeld? Commander of the US Armed Forces. Why didn't American Airlines immediately alert the FAA headquarters and the military at 8:20 when the airline first learned from flight attendants on board that a hijack was underway? I know that had 3 questions in it, but shush. Number 2, the ignorance of the FBI and CIA. With Al-Qaeda firmly on the radar for years, why were they unable to see this coming? Number 3, I wish I could do graphics, but I can't. The failings of the FBI's translation department. Why wasn't the Bureau set up to decipher the transmissions within its grasp? Number 4, I'm holding my fingers up like someone can see me. Number 4, the role of Pakistani secret intelligence. As the attacks were planned in Afghanistan, who was watching and who was invested? Number 5, the 9/11 Commission's investigation. Why weren't even the most obvious questions addressed? Mekki.
And let's just look at a couple of these here. Okay. The CIA, NSA, FBI, etc., all the agencies within the United States, wider than the sea. Now, we discussed Susan Lindauer's book last week, and she outlines very clearly that the administration at the time did not want to hear it. They didn't want to hear anything about anything. They didn't want to hear about imminent attacks. They didn't want to hear. They wanted to pin everything on Iraq as soon as it happened, even before that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This administration of the time only had a few policy, aims or goals. Very simplistic, very simple, right? I mean, going after Iraq, securing Central Asia's gas and oil, extending America's hegemony into as many areas as possible, which 9/11 achieved, by the way, very nicely, in fact. And it was a very simple kind of thing. I mean, George Bush Jr., his administration was just horrible. He was as a president, he was failing. He was like the absentee president. He didn't know anything about foreign policy. He didn't really know anything about anything. But then, once 9/11 happened, he shone. Because this was a simple cowboy and Indians message, right? The evildoers. Let's get them. If you remember any of the old Hollywood movies, with cowboys and Indians, a cowboy would shoot his gun and 5 Indians would fall off the horse. That's kind of logic they deployed in those movies, right? And that's pretty much what happened here. He brought that same kind of naive thinking into the world where he wanted to go after the evildoers, because all of a sudden he had a moral kind of prerogative. He needed to find the evildoers of 9/11. Never mind that it was him and his cronies.
Common enemy, Mickey. That's the best unifier, isn't it?
100%. And gazillions of dollars were made for a lot of American companies. Mm-hmm. Gazillions of dollars. Never mind oil rights and all kinds of things. But ultimately, it was, of course, an empty kind of dialogue that was being had with everybody, because it was all lies. And the simplistic message was great initially, right? But they burned through that capital really, really quickly. I mean, invade Afghanistan, why? There wasn't a single Afghani on these alleged planes. Now, I'm not saying they did do all of this, they planned it all, but in the very best case scenario, they let it happen. Mm-hmm. This is the best case scenario. 9/11 was not a surprise. 9/11 was not a surprise. Planes being used as missiles was not a surprise. None of these were surprises. What Condoleezza Rice said is a complete falsehood. And look at them now. They're sitting pretty, all of them, as far as they're still alive, and even the families of the ones that have passed on, like Rumsfeld. They are doing really well. And no one is ever coming to them and say, hey, what did you do here? Are you culpable? And none of these questions are being answered. They didn't even answer the question as to why the Bin Ladens were allowed to fly on a no-fly day.
That's right.
That was never answered. Never. Why was Cheney in command? Why was there such a slow response? Why did they let some, well, maybe not hijacked at that point, we didn't know they were hijacked, but why would they let planes fly around off course for half an hour to an hour without any challenge? How does a plane, which is clearly off course, enter the most restricted airspace on the planet?
That's right.
How does it happen?
And then for them, the agencies themselves, to say they didn't know that it was even possible, despite on the same day, at the same time, they were doing a drill for the exact scenario that was happening in real life.
Yeah.
Apparently.
It is, I mean, these are reasonable questions. These are not conspiracy. Like, I mean, look, I hate it when people, put a negative connotation on conspiracies. I'm a conspiracy factist, right? I'm interested in the facts. I don't care about much theories. I want to know the facts. And the facts are this. These are reasonable questions. Why are they not being answered? If there's nothing to hide, then okay. Tell us. Global. It's been 20 years. It's been 21 years, but 23 years rather. It's been a long time. So tell us, please, what happened. Tell us. But nah, it's not going to happen, guys. It's not going to happen. They won't tell us anything. They won't tell us anything for 100 years, maybe longer. How's that possible? They're not telling us. In fact, it reminds me of Göbekli Tepe, where we're not gonna dig for another 150 years. Why? What?
That's right.
What? Who? What? It's like I look at the world, and all I can say is what? I used to get around, okay? I used to, I made sense of the world. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't great, but I get it. I understand what's going on here. Now, what?
Not even at all.
How did that just happen? What?
If you could have a random generator that generated random events, it would be more predictable than now.
Yes, I want the improbability drive from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's what I want. That'll get me where I need to go. It really is insane. And people say, oh no, if there was something to it, then it would have come out by now. No, it wouldn't. The longer we wait, the less likely it is, because the generation that is, it fades. Like the people that in that early 20s now. They don't know any other world.
Mm-hmm.
They know the story. They didn't see it for themselves, right? They grew up with whatever they were told, and actually, young people these days are pretty cluey, a lot of them, right? And a lot of them are listening, well, maybe not a lot, but quite a few are listening to the station and to this show even as we speak. And there are questions that they have, I'm sure. Because you have to ask yourself, how is it that nobody really investigated any of this? Nobody. And again, the one thing that is the truth is that if you look at the collapse of the two towers and Building 7, those just in and of themselves, by themselves, as facts, as three facts. Free fall speed is not possible unless you remove all obstacles in the way of the free fall.
It's
so if you talk about
that's what he's saying.
Yeah. If you're pancaking floor and floor and floor, there will be a delay as it pancakes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it's called physics. Unless it crumbles to dust. Okay, it is removed. The resistance is removed prior to the pancaking, right? Then you get to free fall. If there's nothing in its way, you can have free fall. So free fall is crazy. The lack of debris is crazy, and the collapse of World Trade Center 7 in and of itself a very large building. I mean, dwarfed by the two towers, of course, but the Building 7 was a big building. It would have been the biggest building in Sydney if it were here.
That's right.
But it collapsed as well, but it had not sustained any direct damage at all. It didn't even have much debris falling on it, which is another crazy thing. It's no debris anyway. And then there were fires there, but a fire on a couple of floors doesn't collapse a building on itself, and certainly not in a completely symmetrical fashion. So just
not
these three
not
buildings.
a steel internal skeleton building
No.
like that. No.
It's complete. And look, the World Trade Center towers had been built specifically because they're so tall, with an airline collision in mind.
That's right.
Okay, they had been built with an airline collision in mind. You have to also understand, airlines or airplanes are not made of steel, and where they have stronger metals, it's not very, very thick. Planes have to be as light as they can. They will use the lightest material available to them. Now, if a plane slices into a steel girder, into construction steel, the girder is going to be okay. The plane is not.
That's right.
The plane will not. I don't care what the impact speed is.
It's
the
like
plane
an aluminium can.
Essentially, the plane will be shredded. The steel girder will sustain damage. Sure, maybe even one or two will fail. It's possible, right? Especially when the heavy engines hit. If the engines are hitting, those big turbine engines, sure enough, that can do damage, right? But not the plane. Not the plane. And I find it astounding that the simple physics of it. This is what gets me. It wasn't being addressed. Because all they said is, it happened, so therefore it must have happened this way, right? No, it's insanity. It is complete and utter insanity. And it really upsets me that these questions to this day have not been answered, because there's 3,500 people that were killed that day. They have no answers.
That's right.
Who killed them? Osama bin Laden was never charged. Did you know that?
No.
Within 2 years, I mean, afterwards he may have, but within 2 years of the thing, he wasn't charged with it because there was no evidence. Afghanistan may have been harboring him, more likely Pakistan though, okay? But Afghanistan, there were no Afghanis on the plane, if there were any people on the plane for that matter. Okay, and what they are telling us, there were a lot of Saudis on the plane. Nobody invaded Saudi Arabia, did they? No, not to my knowledge. Because this is not about anything but money and power. And that's what happened that day. The American people were duped into relinquishing a lot of the freedoms they had. I remember George Bush said, they hate our freedoms. No, they don't. You hate the freedoms. You.
That's right.
You hate the freedoms the American people used to have. Patriot Act 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Office of Homeland Security. A new organization created, the first one since the FBI. And then, like again, Patriot 1, 2, and people, you know, the guys, they're still holding people today that haven't seen trial for 9/11. They still have them. On what grounds? And why can't you try them? Obama tried. Apparently, the security concerns were too much. You know, like it was too hard.
So remember, Obama said he was going to close Guantanamo Bay.
That didn't happen.
No.
And
It's too hard.
It's too hard. And we're still living in that world that was created on that day. We're still living in that world. Iraq is a failed state. ISIS is still around. Make no mistake, they're still around. Right? I think they're biding their time. But now with the new disaster that's happening in the Middle East, I mean, this is not going to end well for anyone. The Middle East is just going to melt down. Okay, that's my prediction. But brother, I tell you, look, why don't we go to disturbing questions that remain yet unanswered about 9/11, text by friend. Sure, there are a few more than the other one, and this was, I don't even know when this was published, but that would have been fairly recent. Let me just check the website if it still exists. But why don't you go ahead and take us through?
Sure. So, disturbing questions yet unanswered about 9/11, about the 9/11 attacks by Fran Shure, Shure, if you want to look it up. Due to the nearly total blackout in the US news media, few Americans even know that there are serious, uninvestigated questions. That word is perfectly cromulent, Mickey.
Yes, it is.
Questions which challenge the official story, in inverted quotes, of the 9/11 attacks and which strongly imply complicity by elements of the US government. Few know about the 9/11 Commission. Know that. I'm sorry, I'll start again. I'll fix it in post. Few know that the 9/11 Commission has consciously ignored these questions. They were presented to the commissioners by the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Commission, family members of 9/11 victims, who begged them to investigate these questions. As one family member was told by a commissioner, it's not the Washington way to ask pointed questions. Wow, that's telling you. Yet, in spite of this almost complete censorship by the mainstream news outlets, and in spite of what amounts to a sophisticated cover-up by the 9/11 Commission, more and more Americans influenced by the internet, published books and videos are becoming skeptical of the official story and calling for a new, truly independent investigation. Not one run by DC insiders with conflicts of interest with those they are supposed to probe. So, what are some of those uninvestigated questions? Well, some are actually facts, and they include Air Force jets not being scrambled to intercept the hijacked airliners, which is standard operating procedure whenever any airliner veers off course and loses contact with the air control tower. 10 to 20 minutes is normal to intercept a wayward plane, but 1.5 hours passed before a single jet was scrambled on 9/11. Why? Reports in international media regarding the Bush administration's plans to invade Afghanistan well before 9/11, 2001, in order to establish an American oil pipeline across this country. Another one, project for a new American Century document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, written before the 2000 election, showing that Bush's cabinet intended to take military control of the Gulf region even if Hussein was not in power. $100,000 wired to Muhammad Atta, one of the lead hijackers, by the head of the ISI, Pakistan's Secret Service, who was meeting with top Bush administration officials in Washington on 9/11 2001, the ISI is financed by the US. Insider stock trades in weeks and days before 9/11 called put options. Bets that a corporation's stock value will fail or fall. It's a short, basically, against United and American Airlines, as well as other businesses affected by 9/11 attacks. This is a common indicator of an impending terrorist attack. What about multiple warnings from the intelligence community to specific individuals not to fly on 9/11? Osama bin Laden being visited in a hospital in Dubai by a CIA agent in July 2001 and yet not apprehended. President Bush forbidding investigations into the financial ties between the bin Laden family and the White House. The World Trade Center towers falling at or below free fall time, even though there would have been tremendous resistance offered by the intact structure below. Critics of the official account contend that the only way these two towers could have fallen this fast and in the way they fell was with bombs placed throughout the buildings, or the demolition, as well as in the basement. Also, reports of what sounded like bombs going off was reported by firemen as they fled the collapsing buildings. Building 7, which sustained only superficial damage from the collapse of the two World Trade Center towers, falling in complete conformity to a controlled demolition. In fact, the lease owner, Larry Silverstein, says pull it, is saying it was pulled, jargon for a controlled demolition. And finally, compelling video footage indicating that something other than a 757 hit the Pentagon. There is no wreckage to be seen, and the hole in the Pentagon is reported to only be 14 to 16 inches wide. Not the full collapse that they've now brainwashed us into believing, but the initial hit, much too small for a 757 airliner to fit into. I remember not even seeing broken windows next to it. Why does the Pentagon refuse to release video footage proving that a 757 hit the Pentagon and therefore disprove this allegation? All of this evidence is stunning, and the last 3 items seem to enter the arena of the Twilight Zone. Yet, when a murder is being investigated, is any stone left unturned? Shouldn't all evidence be thoroughly probed, no matter how unthinkable? And just for those, is that still alive, Meki, that document? I'm going to paste it into
Yes, it is. It is.
Cool.
There's a couple extra links in there if you want to have a look. It's WordPress, and you'll find links to a whole bunch of stuff actually. So just have a
I've
look.
just shared the screenshot of it so someone could type it in, pause it.
Okay, cool. Interesting. One of the lead investigators, and I heard him talk, I think at a Nexus conference, Michael Rupert. In 2014, apparently he killed himself. And again, I'm not sure that actually happened. No, he's dead. It did happen, but I'm not too sure that he actually.
Slippery floors, Meki, and
Well,
open windows.
we'll talk about Michael Rupert at some other point. The next piece here is an actual study, and the study is called a structural reevaluation of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. And the authors are G. Leroy Halsey, PhD, PESE, University of Alaska Fairbanks, and Zili Kwan, PhD, Bridge Engineer, South Carolina Department of Transportation, and Feng Zhao, PhD, Associate Professor, Nanjing University of Science Technology, Department of Civil Engineering, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, College of Engineering and Mines, Institute of Northern Engineering, University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alaska, etc., prepared for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. March 2020. Abstract. A structural reevaluation of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 by the aforementioned authors. And this is what it says. This report represents the findings and conclusions of a 4-year study of the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, WT7, a 47-story building that suffered a total collapse at 5:20 p.m. on September 11, 2001, following the horrible events of that morning. The objective of the study was threefold. 1. Examine the structural response of WTC7 to fire loads that may have occurred on September 11, 2001. 2. Rule out scenarios that could not have caused the observed collapse. And 3. Identify types of failures and their locations that may have caused total collapse to occur as observed. Okay, the UAF research team utilized 3 approaches for examining the structural response of WTC7 to the conditions that may have occurred on September 11, 2001. First, we simulated the local structural response to fire loading that may have occurred below floor 13, where most of the fires in WTC7 are reported to have occurred. Second, we supplemented our own simulation by examining the collapse initiation hypothesis developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. Third, we simulated several scenarios within the overall structural system in order to determine what types of local failures and their locations may have caused the total collapse to occur as observed. Okay. The principal conclusion of our study is that fire did not cause the collapse of WTC7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that studied the collapse. The secondary conclusion of our study is that the collapse of WTC7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. Let me say this again. The secondary conclusion of our study is that the collapse of WTC7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. Every column in the building, 47 stories.
80
times
columns.
How many columns? That's, you go, what? That's, again, I'm stuck in my loop, Dave. What? all input data, results, data, and simulations that were used for or generated during the study are available at http ine.uaf.edu/WTC7. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just paste that into the chat, and you guys can have a look at that yourselves, of course, just at your own leisure. Now that's you go, okay, that's interesting. So what are you saying then, Mackie? It's really pretty straightforward, right? What NIST or other, even popular mechanics, what these people have said is simply not the case according to the study. The only way it could have happened if all the columns failed at the same time. That's what simultaneous means. Forget pancaking. Pancaking is now out of the question, because if you pancake, it is staggered. Okay, it's consecutive failure, not consecutive versus simultaneous failure. And by the way, the whole report is 125 pages. Yeah? If you're bored, I'm downloading it as we speak because it's free to download. You can do the same thing, and it looks at all of it. It looks at it's pretty thorough. I got to say, this is pretty damn thorough. But what do you say? Oh, I already have it. I downloaded it before. Oh, there you go. It's insane. Okay. All right. Okay. The next one is related. Commentary, the Pulse.1, by Arjun Valia, September 11, 2021. September 11, 2021. I'll just quickly do this one, and then Dave, yours is the next. I think the commentary. I think that's important. Okay, the significance of near-simultaneous failure of every column in the building is critical because it leads one to posit that explosive must have been used to bring it down. Explosives would mean someone had access to the tower's main structures to plant all of the explosives. Unlike NIST's non-transparent model of explaining how WTC-7 came down, the research team at UAF made all of the data used and generated during the study available to the public. And I can still download it, so it's still there, everybody. Okay, so the study we just talked. This is the study. He is Arjun Valia. He's referring to the study we just discussed. NIST's official explanation for why they did not release their own model, because it might jeopardize public safety. What? Is there such a glaring engineering error there that was maybe committed in many other buildings that they can't do it now? That's a bit of a worry, I think. Also worth noting, Dr. Robert Corral, a professor emeritus of civil engineering at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada, alongside Anthony Giambotti and Ted Walter, published a paper titled 15 years later on the physics of high-rise building collapses in the European Scientific Journal. I urge you all to download that one as well. And again, it comes to very similar conclusions. And again, it's best if you look at it yourself. I'll put the link. I'll put the link in the chat. I mean, again, I'm at the what stage of I don't know. What? I mean, at some point, though, you really have to go. No, Mackie, this is not real. None of this is real. Surely it has to be. It has to be something else, right? Except.
Oh, you'd think
it isn't. Yeah, well, it's just nuts. Okay, here we go.
All right, so this leads us to the commentary. And now this is an opinion piece, and it says 2 decades after 9/11, many questions are left unanswered. And it's a picture here of Taliban fighters take control of the Afghan presidential palace after President Ashraf Ghani fled the country in Kabul, Afghanistan, Sunday, August 15th, 2021. Now, moral panics leave a trail of catastrophic results by Gershon Shafir, September 9, 2021. Shafir is a distinguished professor of sociology at UC San Diego and lives in La Mesa. How did the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon lead to 20 years of state building in Afghanistan that cost more than $2 trillion? The lives of 2,448 US soldiers, 1,144 NATO allies, 66,000 Afghan military members and police, and 440 aid workers. Why? At the conclusion of the fight against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, did a military presence continue under 4 US presidents, only to end with the ignominious return of the Taliban? What went wrong? Now there's a picture of the rebuilt memorial.
I've been there.
The Twin
It's
Towers.
massive.
Yeah, it is. Oh, now, and what about the question about where did all the gold go?
Where did all the
Crazy.
gold go? Well, in fact, that's a very good question. Where did all the gold go?
Yeah, because all the gold was in the basement, I think, apparently. So, who knows? Now, September 3rd, 2021, the proper place to start is then President George W. Bush and the Vice President Dick Cheney's failure to understand that terrorism is the weapon of the weak. The strong seek to crush their enemy's soldiers. In the social sciences, we call the Bush-Cheney war on terror response a moral panic. They cast the 9/11 attack and the threat of Al-Qaeda terrorism not as a danger to individuals and property, but as an attack on the American way of life and its liberties, on morality, on civilization itself. In contrast, European states choose to deal with terrorist attacks as criminal matters, not acts of war. Wildly inflating the peril replaced strategic considerations with existential jeopardy, justifying a disproportionate response to an exaggerated threat. Instead of relying on intelligence gathering and police investigations, the metaphorical war on terror led to a real war in Afghanistan and then to its unwarranted sequel in Iraq. 2 decades-long occupation of Afghanistan after the defeat of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban was justified as state building. Imposing a Western model, replacing the traditional decentralized regime befitting a nation of ethnic enclaves, required the continued deployment of US and Allied troops in the country. But continued occupation led to resistance. Resistance led to repression and consequent loss of Afghan lives, only to boost the Taliban. Sinking additional lives and treasure in then President Barack Obama's 2009 counter-insurgency surge, opposed by then President Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden, only delayed the hour of reckoning. Endless training of Afghan troops further postponed the inevitable, leaving us with the uncomfortable question, why did the Taliban not require training? Their strength steadily grew, and even before the US began its recent withdrawal, terribly by the way, they controlled roughly half the country. Mekki.
Moral panics leave a trail of catastrophic results. When the sword of existential threat is said to hang over us, the sword of Damocles, it became easier to suppress dissenting voices, shrink the sphere of public debate, distrust expert opinions. For example, most Middle East scholars opposed the Iraq War, as did I, not that it matters. Discredit normal politics and loosen legal constraints. Impulsive, vengeful acts replace methodical, purposeful thinking and planning. Those who inherited the war launched under mass hysteria found it hard to back out. It's a quagmire. It's called quagmire. An endless, boundless, expanding enemy morphing rapidly from Al-Qaeda to Salafis to Middle Eastern Muslims and eventually to Muslims in the US changed the American domestic climate. The toxic fantasy of Islamophobia fed into the xenophobic paranoia, equating immigrants, another favorite target of moral panics, not only with criminals and purveyors of drugs, but also with potential terrorists. Demonizing all refugees, frequently in reasonable fear for their lives, evolved into a pervasive, systematic, and institutionalized operation. Policing became militarized. A sprawling homeland security apparatus was devised, and border walls were built. The Afghan war, unlike previous wars the US had fought, was not financed with taxes, but put on a credit card, adding some $6.5 trillion of interest that our children and their children and their children's children and those children will bear into the future ad infinitum. Many questions remain that cannot yet be answered. US international prestige suffered a serious hit, but its extent depends on future lessons to be learned. A US that will reserve its military power for essential tasks justified by carefully understood national interests and exercise the soft power of its democratic values will continue projecting its international weight. The fact that aside from some extreme partisans, few now ask who lost Afghanistan seems to be a promising signal. Advising US ally Israel that military occupation is no longer a promising or legitimate tool of international politics can save both partners many future disappointments, but there are no signs of a US willingness to share the painful lessons of the Afghan debacle. I think we can see that happening and playing out right now. The courageous rank-and-file soldiers who fought the Taliban and the Islamic State were promised victory, but were not told about their commanders' pessimistic assessments. Some of the embittered and disillusioned US veterans of the war in Vietnam later formed dangerous and conspiratorial militias that challenged the authority of the American government and its constitution. Will there be a similar anti-war democratic? Will there be a similar anti-democratic formation following the Trump and Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan? Probably.
Well, we made it. We've only got less than a minute left.
Beautiful. Dude, I don't know. I don't even know what to say to any of this anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I speculate, Mekki, that we're going to be talking a lot about the Trump attempted assassinations as well, in the same way as, JFK actual assassination went on mysteriously for 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah, I like how you said the actual assassination.
Well, they're attempted, but they're not going to get the second guy for attempted, apparently, because he didn't fire his weapon.
No, it's not only that, but, I mean, were they... I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
Not enough
we can
time.
talk off air as much as we like about it, but it's...
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, it's a bit like that.
I don't know. I think we're in a completely different world with politics these days, and the way we're all being controlled and everything that's led us to this point
no doubt.
has been in someone else's hands. And there's the music, Mekki. This is the end of today's Shiny Side Out. We'll catch you Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 a.m. for Plato's Cave, and then again next week for Shiny Side Out. In the meantime, Mekki, what do we do?
Be safe!